Now 8 o'clock. Thank you. It's a June 22nd, 2022 Policy Committee meeting, now called to order. Zachary Epps is co-chair of the committee. We will start off with a roll call for our board members today. I will just go by the order that I see you all. Mr. Charles Burdell Williams.
Present.
Mrs. Julie Haywood.
Present in my car, so I'll go off a video after roll call. Thank you.
Awesome. And obviously Zachary Epps here present as well. We were made aware that Ms. Lohman, also a member of the committee, may join us a little later. But for now, I'll move forward to approval of the last meeting's minutes, which would be May 25th, 2022. Have a motion to approve the minutes.
Move to approve the minutes, Julie Haywood.
Yep, second, Charles Burdell Williams.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any dissent? That's everyone. Aye as well. All right, that's approval of the May 25th minutes. With that, I will hand it over to administration and our solicitor for today's presentation.
All right, good morning. So we're going to start with old business policy. Policy 362, 462, and 562. Outside employment and outside business interests are going to be consolidated to policy 362 and will be up for adoption at the August 9th board meeting.
Good morning. And just before I give my comments, I just want to introduce, I have with me Faranmi. She's on the screen. She's the other Ed Diazio on the screen using the link. She is our one of our summer law clerks at Whistler for the summer. She came to us last year and is actually returning to us this year. So I wanted to bring her along so she could see a committee meeting. So Ms. Jackson, indicated it would be okay to bring her along today. So I just want to welcome her to the committee and just let you know who she is. And Faranmi, if you want to say hello, feel free.
Everyone, thank you for letting me join your meeting today. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you for being here.
And with policy 362, 462, and 562, there's been no changes since last month. This is just a consolidation item.
Any comments from the board?
Just one quick comment. I don't think there was any issue. There's no issue. So the actual version of the policy that will be up for adoption, the consolidated version, is that one available? Like, I'm looking at all of the previous versions. I just didn't see, oh, you know what? It might be this one.
So there were a number of attachments before, and we've consolidated them into attachment A. All of these other attachments that were here before, they really did not match this policy. They were the wrong forms, Mr. Burdell Williams. So we cleaned that up in the consolidation.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Because I wasn't seeing it, so that was my bad. I was just looking at all of the strike through language on the previous versions of the different sections of the policy.
Understood. Yep.
All right, thank you. We have no members of the public in attendance at the moment, so we will move forward. That, as Ms. Jackson mentioned, that will move forward for adoption at our next legislative meeting.
The next policy is policy 702, gifts, grants, and donations, which will also go up for adoption August 9th, 2022.
And 702 is here on my screen. Everybody can see my screen, correct? Am I sharing the right screen?
Yeah, we can see the scrolling through the
Okay.
702 now. Yeah.
Okay, so no changes since May. This was an item that is on review for the committee because it's 10 years old. And we ensured that the scope of this policy used to discuss some naming rights. And now that there's a separate policy that addresses naming rights, we removed the duplicative language from 702, and 702 is now just a general policy about essentially donations to the district.
All right, moving forward to comments from the board. I see Mrs. Haywood.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Epps. Mr. Diazio, I know that the title of the policy is gifts, grants, and donations, but in the actual body of the policy, I didn't see any reference to grants. Is there a different process for accounting for grants that may be different than what's already out there for gifts and donations?
The only thing that I could imagine is if someone wanted to set up, for example, a scholarship fund for a student and wanted to fund that scholarship in the form of a grant, in the sense that, you know, you're a grant of money to one student per year who's going to do XYZ after they graduate from Cheltenham. I suppose that could be considered a quote grant, but they get treated the same way as you know, gifts or donations, essentially, because they get accepted by the board, and then it's sort of a donation with a stated purpose, and it would just get used for that purpose. And the business office would put that in a specific account for whatever the purpose is. And actually that happens from time to time. I've worked even just in Mr. Linderman's short time here in the district. We've had one or two scenarios where there's been sort of student scholarships or things like that that get put in different accounts. So I think that's what's intended to be meant by the term grants. But it doesn't necessarily get spoken to specifically in the policy because the treatment of it is sort of the same as any other donation.
Okay, thank you. Would it be appropriate, since the body of the policy doesn't really specifically address grants, to maybe collectively refer to gifts, grants, and donations as donations?
Yeah,
So that it doesn't have to be, restated throughout the policy?
it certainly could. The title could just be donations, or it could be donations to the district, whatever the committee wanted to consider. But I think that would be a legitimate and appropriate revision.
Thank you.
Does the committee have a preference?
I would
Okay.
suggest donations to the district, and then reference in the body of the policy, donations to the district, including but not limited to gifts, grants, and donations, something like that.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that change.
Likewise.
So I've changed the title in real time here. I'll go back after this meeting and just, if there's any non-substantive cleanup language that needs to just be adjusted, I'll make sure to do that before the next business meeting.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Diazio and Ms. Haywood, for your questions. With that, for the record, we'll move forward to the next item, as there are no members of the public attending at the moment. So as Mr. Jackson stated, this will move forward for adoption at our next August legislative meeting. I'll hand it back over for policy 801.
Okay, the next policy in AR 801, public access to school records.
And this is the policy that addresses the steps that the district takes essentially to comply with the right to know law in making records available to the public. And much of this, the overwhelming majority of this policy and the AR come from the right to know law. And there have been no substantive changes since last month when the committee looked at this one.
All right, opening up for board comments. All right, with no comments, no substantive changes since the last meeting, I'll hand it back over to admin as continuing for the record. We'll have no public comment at this time. So this also will move forward for adoption at our next legislative meeting. Administrative review to be posted, and I'll hand it back over. Oh, that was posted actually in the attachments. We'll hand it back over to admin.
Are there any questions about the AR?
And the AR is just the fee schedule here, which is the same fee schedule that's currently in effect. No changes to that.
I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'll feel comfortable moving forward. Ms. Jackson.
Okay, so the AR will be posted after the August 31. Next is policy 256, student accidents and injuries, which is up for repeal.
Yes, and this one we discussed repealing this just because wasn't necessarily a policy that many districts have. The process for reporting injuries was very, very specific and nuanced and probably not helpful in real time on the ground. So there was discussion last month that the committee was comfortable moving forward with the repeal, and I indicated that maybe we could add some language to the district safety policy, just brief language about how student accidents should be reported. And that will be an item that we get to that's on the agenda today for new business. So the committee will see that today.
Awesome, thanks for the diligence. We'll move on to comments from the board on 256. All right, see no hands raised. We will, or on mutes, we'll move forward to the next item. Again, for the record, there's no one available for public comment at the moment. I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Diazio, Ms. Jackson.
Thank you. So the last policy under old business is policy 609, investment of district funds, which will go for adoption in August as well.
Yes, and this no changes to 609 since the last meeting. This policy was revised to be consistent with some state law that was adopted a few years back that actually broadened the scope of investments that school districts could invest in. And so this policy mirrors the current version of state law. That was the major change.
All right, thank you. We'll move to comments from the board. All right, just a question for curiosity. My assumption is any investments are not directly managed by the district, and so do these items become what is in like a contract or something? It's like, how does that work?
You would have so many of these would be in some sort of pool, I assume. Mainly, that's generally how that works. And I don't necessarily know the ins and outs of how the business office handles that, but it would be, I imagine there would be a financial consultant that the district would work with, and then the funds would, of course, be subject to audit and periodic review in terms of receiving statements and matching the statements to, prior statements to make sure that all of the money is accounted for. If Mr. Epps, there's any additional specific questions, I can certainly bring the answers. I can talk with Mr. Linderman and bring any answers to either the board meeting, send it out via email, or bring it to the next committee meeting. So
I see. It's really out of curiosity, so certainly not an A1 priority.
Okay.
But it's really it's very basic, and so really that's what I'm wondering. Like, how does this? It's sort of like the audit process ensures there's oversight of it, but it's really how these terms translate into. If we're not directly managing the funds, how do these terms then become like part of the practice for the financial consultant? I see Ms. Haywood's hand is raised as well.
Yes, thank you. A different question I had, and this may be something that would be contained in the AR. If the board wanted to take a position that they wanted to make sure that any financial advisor that we were working with to invest our funds did not invest our funds in, let's say, gun manufacturers, for example, or something else, that we wanted to be assured of, would that be something that we would incorporate into the AR? And that obviously would have to be, a further discussion by the board and administration, but is something that we may want to pursue.
I think it's a good question, Mrs. Haywood. What I would like to do, if we could, and this also sort of piggybacks off of what Mr. Epps was just talking about, because I don't know the exact process and how these investments get made. Let me check with business office to find out how that all plays out. And then as long as it's logistically possible, I think this definitely would be the policy where that could go. And given that we have a lot of time before the next legislative meeting, I'll have plenty of time to talk with Mr. Linderman. And if we have to, we can either bring the policy back after it's adopted, or we can choose to pull it from the second reading list in August and just do a repeat first reading and bring it back again to the committee in August for further review, if that's something that you want to discuss. I think that would be my recommendation on the process there. But I think that's a good question, and I'm happy to follow up on it right away with Mr. Linderman's office.
Okay, and Mr. Epps and Mr. Burdell Williams, again, this is just one board member's view, but I think it would provide a great opportunity for the board to have some additional discussion in terms of any limitations we would want to impose in terms of investment of district funds.
I would support that. You essentially took my question to the next step because where I was thinking through, because in the policy is pretty standard, straightforward. And so I appreciate your question and would support that exploration. I see a head nod, Mr. Burdell Williams. Okay, cool.
Yep, certainly. I appreciate the attention to the issue.
Great. And so I guess, Mr. Diazio, would that be something that we would offline have those discussions while you are pursuing, some additional clarification from Mr. Linderman, so that we have at least some framework of potential limitations?
Yes.
Okay.
I will get information out to the committee well in advance within the next week in terms of whether or not that can be done, how it can be done. And then from there, I assume that if it's possible, the committee would like to have further discussion about what limitations you might want to impose. That could actually potentially be a discussion in and of itself that the committee has, not even necessarily thinking about policy language, but just having a discussion about what does the committee want to recommend to the board be the policy about where we invest district funds? And then we can, once there's consensus, then we can bring that back and embed that into policy 609. So in some ways, it may not be the worst thing to allow 609 to proceed, have it be adopted, have the continued discussion about the limitations, and we'll make those changes as soon as there's consensus on it.
Okay, and I think that if we relegate those limitations to the AR, then we could go forward with the policy as proposed and continue to have those discussions in this committee for a recommendation to the board.
Yeah, that's also another great thought, is that we could develop an AR for this one, and that could be the content of the AR. I like that. Thank you for that suggestion.
Sure, sure.
And there's currently an AR, so will we be just adding or revising the AR, or?
So the current AR is being proposed for repeal, which is fine. We can add, ARs are easy to add and take away. So we can proceed with taking this one away, and it's easy in board docs to create a new one when we need to.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for that discussion. For the record, we'll have no public comment at this moment due to no one's in attendance. We'll move forward. As mentioned, this is moving forward for adoption, as restating. The proposal is to move forward with adoption and continue the conversation around any types of restrictions on the actual investments being made. So that'll be at our August legislative meeting. With that, I believe that's all our old business, but I'll hand it back over to admin to continue the presentation.
Thank you. So now we move on to new business. The first policy in AR are 818, contracted services.
Yes, so policy 818, this was being looked at. We identified this as one that needed some revisions. The prior timelines, for example, for obtaining clearances in the regulation were 36 months, and all of that. That timeline is not the current timeline in the Child Protective Services law. So the document needed to be cleaned up. In doing that, you'll see there's the old AR simply dealt with sort of the clearances and the reporting of arrests and convictions. We built in some other additional language about confidentiality, obtaining tuberculosis tests when they're required. And you'll just see the structure of the AR is a little bit clearer and put into better categories so that it's easier to read. Not many substantive changes to the policy.
All right, thank you. We'll open it up for board comments. Mrs. Haywood.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Diazzi, I noticed, I don't remember if it's in the AR, the policy, where we talk about the employer of the independent contractor being responsible for doing any of the appropriate training. And I guess this may be actually a question for Ms. Tupper Jackson. Are there instances where there may be required training that the district specifically would want the entity that's employing the independent contractor to pursue? And so it would really be that they would be following our lead as opposed to doing training on their own. And if so, do we want to so state either in the AR or the policy?
Most instances, most of the training that we require, I'm thinking for paras or teachers, nurses, is all training that would be done by the agency. There are certain circumstances where we have specific students who might need, who the substitute para may need additional training for, and we provide that, but that all depends on where that person is assigned. So for the most part, the basic trainings that are required, the agency can take care of.
Okay. And so you're comfortable with the language that's currently, I'm not sure if it's in the policy or AR, that the training is done basically by the agency.
Yes, I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
And-
All righty.
and
Thank you.
One thing I'll add to that is, Mrs. Haywood, if there was ever a case where there was for a specific vendor, something that we wanted them to participate in, that the district was hosting, with all of these, with all contractors, there's always a contractor specific agreement contract with the district. And so this policy sort of sets the, kind of sets the floor. But if there was a specific vendor that we were engaging in and we wanted them to go through additional training before they started with us, that can always be a contract requirement in the document that gets negotiated between the parties.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We will, seeing no members of the public at the moment, we will proceed. Hand it back over to go to the next item on our new business.
Well, is policy 818 okay or approved to go on the August agenda as a first read?
Yes, yes. That's not just point of order. That's when I heard approval, technically, yes, a lack of discussion therefore leads to approval.
Right.
Okay, yes. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
No
All
problem.
right, yeah. I was like, wait a second. So yes, it's approved to go forward for the first read at our August legislative meeting. Thank you, Ms. Jackson, for the clarity.
No problem. The next policy is 143, district issued Chromebooks, which is up for repeal.
Yes, so 143, the committee may have seen that document is not currently listed in the draft section of board docs. 143 was identified a number of months ago as a policy that could potentially be repealed. Mr. Barone and I worked, I want to say it was back in 2016 or 2017 on policy 816, which is the district's acceptable use of technology policy. And at that time, that policy was significantly enhanced to contemplate a lot of language about district issued devices. Policy 143 is the district issued Chromebooks device. So it appeared that 143 policy could be repealed on the assumption that everything was addressed in 816. And when we put the agenda together for this month and took a look at 143, we confirmed that 143 will eventually be able to be repealed. There's a little bit of language in 143 that needs to be built into 816 so that the repeal can take place cleanly. And as Mr. Barone looked at 816, he shared that there's sort of a number of other items that he'd like to recommend to the policy. It's been 6 years since we looked at the acceptable use of technology, or 5 or 6 years. And as you can imagine, in the tech world, things change quickly in those number of years. So there's changes that he would like to propose to fee schedules and to the accidental protection damages that are on those devices. Also the scope of the one-to-one program has dramatically expanded since 2016. At the time, we were really just looking at the high school that was one-to-one, and now there's devices into a number of the lower grades. So what we discussed was we're going to look over the summer at 816 and bring the committee some proposed revisions to 816 in August. And that would then be the appropriate time to move the 143 forward for the repeal. So for now, I'm not recommending any action on 143, but wanted to leave it as an agenda item so the committee could know we are having discussion about 143 and 816 and look for more from Mr. Barone and I in August.
Appreciate that distinction. Opening up comments from board members. Right. No discussion at this moment. Also, no attendees from the public for comment. And so, hearing Mr. Diazio, this will not go forward for the August agenda. We will continue this discussion as 816 comes under review, as policy 816 comes under review in August. So thank you for that. I'll hand it back over to move forward to the next item.
Okay, the next item is policy 828, district-wide safety.
Yes, so this was another policy that's good to look at periodically. We put this on the agenda to build in language about student accidents, but I'll highlight a couple other changes that were made. So in the policy, you'll see that language about the creation of a threat assessment team was changed to the continued existence of a threat assessment team now that team exists. Those teams are actually now required by law, but the district had one in place before it became a requirement of law. And then we added that one of the topics that the regulation would address was, as I noted, procedures for reporting student accidents. So those are the only changes to the policy. We also cleaned up the legal references down here, listed the policies with the names of the policies, so that looks nice and is very readable there. In the AR, you'll notice there's a few changes. Removed reference to the CLASP administrator on the safety committee. The threat assessment team language was revised here. There's now a board policy on threat assessment. So that policy was referenced here in the AR. There was no discussion about the school social workers under the safety related services in the prior policy. So added some language about the school social workers being part of the student services program. There's under the role of students in promoting school safety. There was nothing in the current AR that spoke to the Safe to Say program. The Safe to Say program came into existence after this policy was last looked at. So the policy now contemplates reporting through Safe to Say as one avenue for reporting threats or concerning behavior. And where there were references to trauma-informed education or practices, I referenced a board policy 146 on trauma-informed, which is being proposed for adoption or for a first reading today as a new policy. So if the committee moves forward with recommending that policy to the board, this would be the policy that would be cross-referenced here. And then you'll note at the end here, there's a little bit of language about reporting student accidents and injuries that take place on school property. So those were the changes to the regulation and to the policy.
Thank you. We'll open it up to comments from the board. appreciate the diligence on the updates. Question out of curiosity, in terms of the audio and video recordings, are those subject to right to know requests?
The what were the specific items again, Mr. Epps?
Audio and video recordings. In there's reference to just audio and video recordings to enhance safety in
Sure.
this policy.
Yep.
Just as a connection to our earlier discussion, I'm just out of curiosity, would those items be subject to a right to know request?
Generally, if the way in which we usually see those requests are something gets captured on that audio or video, and then we get a request, could be by a parent or a parent of another student who says, I want to see that video because I want to see what happened. In those cases, those videos are generally considered student records because they identify something specific that happened between two students. In that case, anything that is FERPA protected as a student record is exempt from access under right to know. There have been times where, like, let's say you just have surveillance footage that's not picking up anything and it doesn't have anyone on it and someone requests the footage. There's been a number of right to know decisions and court decisions on whether or not that video is subject to right to know. It's a debated and passionate topic. There are exceptions in the right to know law where records can be held back if they would jeopardize the safety of a building. So each request gets looked at individually, and it really depends what's being requested. And so if revealing any of that surveillance would compromise the safety of the district, we can always invoke that exception of the right to know law. But there are times where that criteria is not met and the record is not a student record and the record doesn't meet any of the other exceptions of the right to know law where surveillance video could be considered a public record. But again, it has to meet all of those criteria.
Appreciate the detail, and what I assume might be a curveball. You were quite prepared there, Ed. So,
we deal with it an
thank you.
awful lot with videos.
Yeah,
and there's actually been some talk about legislative reform to the right to know law to clarify certain things. I think fundamentally the problem is any changes at the legislative level to the right to know law that make fewer records public is immediately stamped as an act of anti-transparency, right? And so when you ask legislators to do that, it's a hard ask because that is the response to that type of ask. I think that's just the nature of the topic, but yes, frequently discussed and talked about topic. So thank you for the question. It's a good one.
Yeah, and I appreciate to know that there are privacy protections in place already.
Yes.
Mr. Burdell, I saw you unmuted. Did you have a comment?
No, my comment was just in support of the question and the inquiry, because I do know just in my time in the district that there have been some, just random various personal questions and issues around video and audio pertaining to school buses, right? Because I think that is the place where we have, the least amount of oversight, if you will, in a given moment, right? The person's general focus is on traffic conditions and ensuring, transportation. But I just know just over time, conversations with community members have come up in regards to, various, incidents where school bus video, may have been helpful to have for the review of everyone involved, and to the people's disappointment, that wasn't the case. So I'm just nodding just an acceptance of the fact that the inquiry is important. And I think that, you know, just understanding and considering why it isn't there is also important too.
And that's a good point. I'll add the bus video is, of all the types of surveillance, bus video is far and away the request we get the most, where people are interested in what's taking place on the bus, and recognizing that the footage on the bus generally depicts students, and that there's real privacy interests in making sure that surveillance is not given to people who shouldn't have it. We built in, as an amendment to the 2017 contract with Cheltenham Transportation, shortly after that contract was approved, we adopted an amendment to it, which was approved by all the parties, that says that anytime Cheltenham Transportation gets a request for video, those requests have to get referred to the district, and the district is the entity that makes the decision on how that information gets released. Because there were times years ago when people were going directly to Cheltenham Transportation to get the video, and it was no fault of anyone. It was just a process that needed to be cleaned up. But that video was being released. Sometimes the district wouldn't know about it, and we would learn about it after the fact when someone would show us the video and say, here, this came from the bus. So that's all cleaned up, and it's been cleaned up for years now, where all those requests get sent to the transportation department, and they get worked out by the district and not by our contractors.
All right. Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Bordeaux Williams.
Good. No further comment. Thank you for that, Ed. I appreciate that context.
Yep.
And I know the community will as well whenever they tune in to catch up on all of the important happenings of today's meeting.
Thanks. Ms. Haywood?
Yes, and just comment, Mr. Diazio, to the extent that we deny a right to know request, possibly for the reasons that you have just articulated, we would put that rationale in a denial letter to the requester, correct?
Yes, anytime we deny, we have to state the basis and support it with a legal citation, correct?
Okay, thank you. So I think, Mr. Bordeaux Williams, that is helpful for those folks who make those inquiries that may have been denied.
Yep. No, absolutely. And on those individual, I guess the incidents that were referenced with the community members that I've spoken with, there were no details or no direction given on my part, and they didn't, share whether or not, there was a specific request. I'll just add that it was more of an anecdotal, seemed like an obvious thing to have during incident review. And I just know that it's come up more than once. And I didn't really have an answer for it necessarily, other than, I know that there are privacy concerns with when children are involved, when other people's children are involved who you haven't given consent to have their likeness shared and all that good stuff. So I just wanted to just elaborate just a little that there was no specific request necessarily. It was more so just the anecdotal aspect of it should be made, available. And it's, more than one community member has said that to me. But
and Mr. Bordeaux Williams, that context, if I could add one more thing that might be helpful. The
Sure.
other category of requests we frequently get is, let's hypothetically say something happens between two kids in the hallway, in the lunchroom, and one parent comes back to us and says, I'd like to see the video of the cafeteria to see what happened between my son and this other student. The way in which those requests get handled, because again, that record is very likely a student record of those two students who are engaging in whatever they were engaging in that's depicted on the surveillance. Many times the building principal will get involved and will share the very limited portion of the video that depicts what happened. And to the extent that people that are uninvolved in that incident can be blurred out, they get blurred out, and they come in and they sit with the principal and they watch the video. Many times, or not many times, sometimes parents will say, well, thank you for letting me watch this with you, but I want the whole video and I want a copy of it. And we don't honor those requests for obvious reasons. But if there is something that is captured on surveillance footage that involves a student and a parent wants to see it, there is a mechanism for coming in the appropriate environment with a school official and seeing that. So if you're getting concerns or requests from community members, feel free to let them know, contact their building principal, because if something did happen, there is a procedure that's in place for handling those requests. And we've done as part of, it wasn't the last 2 years during COVID, but part of the, I recall on at least 2 occasions when Dr. Marseille was still around, part of our summer in-service with the building administrators included a review of that exact process. So that should be something they're very familiar with managing. So feel free to refer them to the principals.
And in each case I did, actually.
Yep.
Right, as a board member, I'm not the best person to help with that particular guidance, right? It's a little bit outside of my responsibility. So I definitely lean on the professionals in that case. So certainly appreciate that additional context, Mr. Diazio. And sorry if I'm sounding very, congested. I am sorry.
No need for the apologies. I'm sorry for you, Mr. Bertel. It's allergy season. All right, we will. I don't see any other hands raised from the board for 828.
I did have one more.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Small thing, sorry. Just on the naming convention of our district safety officer, I think at the very beginning of the policy, or is it in the AR? Yeah, yep, right here. So is in fact the name of our safety manager, are they the safety and security manager? And Ms. Tolbert Jackson, that might be a question for you. I just from a title perspective, can we be more broad there so we're not locked into what the actual name of the role is? Or if we need to be very, very specific, I just want to make sure that is in fact the title of the individual who is, in the role of safety and security manager.
So currently the title is district security manager.
Okay, so I'll update that now. That would be Mr. White's position, Ms.
Yeah.
Jackson. District security manager.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. I just know, just in my dealings with my day work, there's constantly this name play,
Sure.
energy, and I just want to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a spot where we're clearly identifying the person, whether by role or by title, but specifically whichever one we want, and that we're meeting the intent there. So thank you. That's all I had.
All right, thank you. Good catch. Not seeing any members of the public at this time live. And so this is tagged as discussion as well. And so as question, are we moving forward for this to be on the agenda, or is this a discussion item for later?
Yes, this can be moved. This would be moved forward.
Okay, cool. And so yes,
Yep.
828 will move forward for first read at our August legislative meeting. And as we move to the next item, I'd like to consideration of policy 146, trauma-informed approach. As we move forward, I would offer appreciation. This is a new policy, and so we recently considered policy 258 around a gender expansive. We're now talking about trauma-informed, and so I'm really thinking about yesterday. We had a educational affairs meeting. And Dr. Smith made mention that at conferences and going around and about that Cheltenham School District, folks are watching, folks are paying attention and to a lot of the good things that are happening. And so we often talk about, how our scholars learn. I appreciate that we're talking about how they are treated within the schools, and this policy is another thing that advances that conversation. And I also would share, that's my personal statement as one board member. I will also convey Ms. Lohman. I also express appreciation and sincere hope that she'd be able to be a part of this conversation today. But certainly we'll have it, as this is just first read. So I'll stop there with the appreciation for admin and our solicitor, and hand it back over for the presentation.
Yes, so at the very end of the last meeting, I did hear Ms. Lohman ask about, if for next year we could take a look at trauma informed. And given that she had mentioned that she had attended a PSBA conference and they had recommended this policy, so we were actually able, in speaking with Ms. Jackson and Ms. Keene, who was on the call at the beginning here but had to step off for an interview. We discussed that we could get that on the agenda actually for this month. This policy that you're seeing largely tracks I was able to locate the PSBA template. And largely what you're seeing here is the PSBA template with a little bit of, customization with the wording to reflect the way Cheltenham writes policy. So that's what you're seeing here. Certainly a discussion item. If the committee's interested in moving it forward to first reading, it can certainly be moved forward to first reading. And Mr. Epps, to your point, I know Ms. Lohman will want to weigh in, but there will be this is only the first reading of this one. So definitely not the last time we'll see this. But basically the policy talks about the district having a trauma-informed approach to education. And then there's language in the guidelines about, what does that mean? And how do you implement it? So in the authority section here, there's a list of just different ways that you can think about trauma-informed from an attendance standpoint, a discipline standpoint, a planned instruction standpoint, a wellness standpoint. You can read the list here. And then the Director of Student Services, in consultation with the superintendent, was designated as were designated as the individuals to oversee the implementation of the trauma-informed approach. And when I say implementation, I believe that the district is doing an awful lot of work from a trauma-informed lens currently, but this memorializes those practices in a policy. And then there are some guidelines about the possible training that different stakeholder groups would go through related to trauma-informed, and the way in which students are recommended for services as you look at their situations through that trauma-informed lens. And then again, age appropriate, the policy calls for appropriate instruction for various components of emotional learning, resilience, self-awareness, coping strategies, things like that. And then there's some provisions about staff wellness and support, and the way in which the trauma-informed approach is evaluated and revised based on data. So I know that was a quick summary of all of the general topics that were laid out, but that's the general flavor for the policy.
Thanks. We'll open it up for board comment. Mrs. Haywood?
Yes, thank you. I plus one Mr. Epps' comments and Ms. Lohman's comments regarding the appreciation for the trauma-informed policy. The one question I have is, I know probably a few years ago, PSBA was recommending kind of an assessment of students on an annual basis. And I don't know if we do that in terms of kind of evaluating whether students have been exposed to trauma, so that we would be able to then address those concerns more directly. So maybe that's really a question for Ms. Tolbert Jackson.
Julie, could you repeat that?
Yes. Do we do any kind of overall student assessments on an annual basis to determine whether students are experiencing trauma? Again, it may be something that may be recognized through training, but may not. And so being able to identify students who maybe have experienced a traumatic loss in their family and being able to appropriately address those needs.
Yeah, I would have to defer that to Dr. Smith. I know that Dr. Gallagher does do some training regarding this for special needs students. Other than that, I'd have to either ask Jessica Keene or Dr. Smith.
Okay. Yeah, I know that we had talked about that. I think Dan had maybe raised that a couple of years ago, and I'm not sure whether, we do that or not, just out of curiosity. And then the one recommendation I would make is to cross-reference our equity policy as relates to trauma-informed decision-making and training. I think it's important that there's so many of our policies really that are undergirded by equity, but this one in particular, I think would be a good cross-reference to our equity policy.
And Ms. Haywood, I think I am seeing it here. Did you see it? I do have equity here
Oh, great.
cross-referenced in 829. I agree with you. I think it's a great policy to cross-reference. And we can certainly follow up. I think really what you're asking is, do we do any sort of climate surveys or student surveys about, where they are, right? As students. I know that the district administers the PACE survey to students in certain grades. So some of the information that comes from that survey may help inform where our students are. But we could follow up with Ms. Keene before the next meeting about whether there are other assessments that assess students in terms of, where they are at and whether they've, to your point, have experienced some sort of trauma. So I've made a note of that.
Great, thank you. Because I think if we could be more proactive as opposed to reactive,
Sure.
we would really kind of meet students where they are at the moment.
So just real quick to that point, a lot of that does happen through our MTSS, and especially at the tier 1. There's systems within each school. When you see, say, a change in the student's behavior, or the grades have dropped significantly, or this or that, there are checkpoints built in within the structures at the school level. But we can get more clarity around, as Mr. Diazio said, around what those structures actually look like and how we monitor that.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to say I have a hard stop at 9, so I'll be leaving this call, but thank you very much for everything today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you for raising that, Ms. Haywood. Comment or kind of question, the development of the trauma-informed, this may be more for admin than Mr. Diazio, the development of the trauma-informed plan, is that something that will happen within or separate from the strategic planning process that we are really already started?
What I envision, and Dr. Scriven, Ms. Jackson, feel free to chime in. I believe what's intended by a plan is more of a not necessarily a written document per se, but a system of practices and procedures that look at all aspects of the delivery of programs and services to students through a that's what I believe. And then I imagine that things like the strategic plan will contain the goals, and the roadways to get there will be written from a trauma informed perspective, just as when you set out to accomplish specific goals in your comprehensive plan, the route to get there will include doing so in an equitable way. That's my sense, but I'm happy for the administrators to chime in as well.
No, you're correct, Mr. Diazio, and that's going to be the work as we continue to see what goals bubble up to the top. This could be something that potentially is a subset of culture and climate, or student well-being. I don't know at this point where it would land, but I know it's going to come up just around the social, emotional well-being of students.
Yes, appreciate that, and also appreciate that it's going to be under one umbrella. It's part of the recommendations we heard was like, as opposed to separate things happening, bringing other things under one umbrella. And so I appreciate that. In the language in the proposal does say direct district staff to develop and implement a plan. And so that language to me resonates differently than what was described. And so if there's some adjustments that can be made there,
Sure.
I totally support the system approach, but the language may lead others to think of.
And that may actually, you just used the word systems or approach. That may be the terminology as opposed to plan. So I can go back and take a look at that before the next meeting.
Awesome. Alrighty. We will move forward. There's no members of the public at this time, so for the record, we won't have comment on this at this meeting. Obviously, the new business. This is the first time we are discussing these, so there'll be further opportunities. I'll hand it. So this will move forward. As a move forward, we have two members here, so maybe we should hold off on deciding whether to move forward or not. Or...
I think Mrs. Haywood indicated that she was comfortable. I think she gave her feedback and was good. So I'm fine with the committee moving it forward, assuming that the two remaining members want to do so.
Right. I do. Obviously, we have a first read and a second read for any comments and any proposed substantive changes.
I agree with that as well.
Yeah, okay, cool. So we'll move forward for first read of policy 146 at the August 9th legislative meeting. All right, with that, that's our last item on the agenda for today. Let me click through. Yeah, that's our last item for agenda for today. So thank you to admin, Mr. Diazio, and the other Mr. Diazio. apologies for getting your name. Hopefully this is some real world experience for you today. With that, I will await a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Charles Burdell Williams.
Point of order. I don't know if we have a second. I don't know if I can make a second. But...
You can. Yep.
Right. Okay. I will second that motion.
No, you have to stay here all day.
Right. Oh God. All right. I'll second that motion, and the policy meeting for today is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Take
Have
care.
a good evening.
Have a great day.
Thanks. See y'all.
All right. Bye-bye.